My name is Ingrid Lyons. I'm the executive director of Save the Boundary Waters, as well as its parent organization, Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness. And I am here in a charming little Airbnb in Washington, D.C., where I think it's 8 o'clock and it's 88 degrees or something crazy like that. And, we wouldn't be Minnesotans if we didn't mention the weather. So it's really hot here. But, so it goes. So I am the leader of this organization. I've been in Washington this week and several weeks over, the past few months, working to protect the boundary waters from sulfide or copper mining. Um, None of you need a reminder, I don't think, about what we're working towards protecting, what we're in this for. But I like to show this picture because here in DC, this is a picture we use quite often. We lost Jim Brandenburg about a year ago, but he was a very noted landscape and wildlife photographer. This is one of his really, really beautiful aerial shots of the Prairie Portage area. And I like to show this because we bring this into offices to help them understand how unique and special this landscape is. It is so deeply interconnected. The fresh water is so fresh, the boreal forests are so dense and alive, and it's a really special resource. And I think this picture really captures it in its relative simplicity. So, as a reminder, this is what we're fighting for, which is good to remember when you're stomping in the halls of Congress and you kind of get in the weeds. It's really about a much bigger landscape and a much bigger ultimate goal, which is to permanently protect this place from sulfide or copper mining. So we had saved the boundary waters, we have boundary waters in the name. Our focus is protecting the boundary waters canoe area wilderness in northeastern Minnesota, and protecting its watershed. So the Rainy River headwaters or the Rainy River watershed is the area that we are working to protect from the threat of sulfide or copper mining. And really, altogether, this is a broad ecosystem of over 4.3 million acres. We call it the Quetico Superior ecosystem. So it's not only the boundary waters, but the Superior National Forest in which the boundary waters sits, Quetico Provincial Park across the border on the Canadian side, and Voyageurs National Park. These are all part of this landscape, and this landscape is at risk because of sulfide or copper mining. Um, we are big place-based people. And again, as we kind of get into the weeds of the politics and the policies and the wonky stuff that I'm going to talk about, I do like to ground us in place. So this is the South Kawashwee River and where it meets Birch Lake, just outside of Ely, Minnesota. The horizon is the boundary waters. And the way the water flows in this area is actually that the South Kawashwee River flows south out of the wilderness, meets with Birch Lake, and it flows north and back into the wilderness. And this is where the Twin Middles project is proposed or has been proposed in the past. So we are particularly concerned about the proximity of this project and the nature of this project. Minnesota is a proud mining state. If you tuned in to the various speeches on the floor last night and this morning, you heard it time and time again. We are a proud mining state. We have, a legacy of iron ore and taconite mining, but we have never had a copper mining industry. Copper mining is part of the sort of hard rock mining family of mining, and it's one of the most toxic industries in America. Um, all sulfide or copper mines that have operated have polluted surrounding ground or surface water in some way. And so we're not an anti-mining organization, but what we are is an organization that acknowledges that some places are just too special to put a mine of this nature. We don't mine on the edge of the Grand Canyon, on the edge of Yellowstone, Yosemite, and we don't do it on the edge of the boundary waters in such a water-rich, unique, interconnected ecosystem. It's also important to note that this waterway is rife with homes, businesses, Voyager Outward Bound School, which takes veterans into the wilderness to help them heal from PTSD and other things. So this is not a inactive or empty area by any means, and this is ground zero, so to speak. And so I just want to sort of remind us all kind of what we have been working on to contextualize what happened today and where we're going. So, like I said, Save the Boundary Waters our goal is permanent protection of the Boundary Waters and its watershed from sulfide or copper mining. And we really tried to boil this down to three steps. Um, Before 2022, Twin Metals Minnesota held federal mineral leases in the headwaters of the Boundary Waters. Um, we believe that these leases were obtained unlawfully because in the Obama administration, they found that uh, the agencies, so Obama's Department of Interior in this instance, actually had the ability and the authority to say to this company that they weren't going to renew their leases. It was really, these are federal government leases, so they can take leases away, especially if lease terms haven't been met, as was the case in this situation. And so in 2022, federal mineral leases were canceled. And in January of 2023, a little over 3 years ago, we achieved a phenomenal feat as a movement, thanks to all of you and the team at our organization and many other partner organizations. And a public land order was signed that protected 225,504 acres in the headwaters of the Boundary Waters, so immediately upstream, from hard rock mining for 20 years. And that's the maximum allowable by law under a law called the Federal Land Policy Management Act of 1976, which governs basically the pathway that the Interior Department took to protect this special area. Now, those protections came with robust study, many resource reports, robust science, economics, cultural uh, analysis, as well as robust public comment periods. 675,000 Americans have weighed in on whether or not this is the right place for this type of mining, and over 99%, believe that it's not the right place. And so, Americans have spoken, Minnesotans have spoken, and this is what these protections are meant to do. And they're 20 years, so obviously not forever. And like I said, this is a permanent protection campaign. We're here for permanent protection of this watershed. And so the next step is to pass a federal law that would codify the mining ban into law. So make those 225,000 acres, take them out of the federal mining program through law forever. And what just happened this morning was that the 20-year protections were overturned by the US House. And now the bill is, sorry, that not House, the US Congress, the Senate voted today. And now the bill heads to President Trump's desk. This is the actual withdrawal area. So the red line is the edge of the Rainy River watershed. So this is the watershed in question. The dark green is the Boundary Waters itself. And then everything in kind of this orange ochre-esque color represents every last square inch of jointly managed federal lands and minerals in this area. So that's the 225,504 acres that I identified before, with the understanding by the federal government after robust analysis that while we have these lines that represent borders between, say, the wilderness and what's technically not wilderness, this is not the right place to develop a massive copper mining project, not just because the water flows north and not just because of the track record of water pollution of this industry, but also the propensity for tremendous noise pollution, tremendous light pollution, tremendous air pollution. And a wilderness designation is the highest form of protection that we have on public lands in this country. The Wilderness Act protects the wilderness character of places like the Boundary Waters. And so if you can hear explosions while you're on a portage with your family, that's not a wilderness experience. If you can't breathe clean air because there's fugitive dust from a tailings pile blowing into your campsite, that's no longer that wilderness experience. That's no longer a wilderness protected the right way. And so taking this area out of the program was extremely common sense in addition to the robust study that reconfirmed for everybody that this really, by all accounts, is the wrong place for this type of mining. So we've had quite a wild, I don't even know how long it's been at this point, 14 months, 15 months. But we've seen over and over again attempts to overturn these very protections using a legislative pathway. And we've been able to beat back every single attempt thus far. So, in addition to Representative Stauber introducing a standalone piece of legislation that would not only have over or revoked the 20-year protections, but granted four mineral leases to Twin Metals, Minnesota for 70-year lease terms. Um, we've seen Mr. Stauber attempt to attach his language to what we call must-pass legislation. So, for example, budget bills like budget reconciliation or interior appropriations. Um, so we saw attempts in June of 2025, November, and December, so several times last year. And then earlier this year, we were faced with the immense challenge that has been this Congressional Review Act challenge by Mr. Stauber. So this isn't the first time we've seen it. We knew it was coming. But I do want to remind people that we've made proponents of this project and of opening the headwaters of this important place and selling it out to corporate interests, we've made their lives difficult. Despite the context and the conditions of Congress right now, they've failed three times before this. And so I know that a lot of people are really disappointed today, to say the very least, and I am counted among them. But I do want to remind you all of the impact we have already had on this fight in this administration. And so the Congressional Review Act, this was our fresh new friend that reared its head in January of this year. And what this is the Congressional Review Act, which was passed in 96 as a way agencies. Basically, if an agency creates a rule, a member of Congress can challenge it under the Congressional Review Act. The mechanism that was used to protect the watershed for 20 years is something called a public land order. Public land orders have never been determined to be rules under the definition of the Congressional Review Act. That's still the same to this day. Typically, lawmakers will go to an office called the Government Accountability Office and ask, hey, is this thing a rule? It's not clear to me if it's a rule. And that office will, make a decision. And usually, folks are listen to that ruling because those are the experts on it. In this case, we didn't see any of that typical process. So on January 7th, the Department of the Interior submitted the public land order protecting the Boundary Waters watershed for 20 years to Congress as if it were a new rule, as if they'd just written it yesterday being January 6th, I suppose. Promptly thereafter, Mr. Stauber introduced House Joint Resolution 140, which is the mechanism through which Congress can challenge a rule under the Congressional Review Act. Very quickly, the House acted to pass this resolution. One thing that makes the Congressional Review Act such an appealing tool for folks who want to get things done quickly is that it creates a clock. There's a 60-day working clock during which time a lawmaker can fight to pass this resolution to undo whatever the rule is, and they only need a simple majority in both chambers to do so. And so that's the timing element that we've been in and that we've been dragging you through for the past several months. And thank you for your patience. 60 working days spreads out a bit longer than a typical 60-day period. Of course, they take Fridays off. We just got off with a 2-week recess. And so after late January, the resolution moved to the Senate, where it sat for a good amount of time. And throughout all of this, of course, there are partners, there are people, there are advocates fighting to make sure the Senate does the opposite of what the House did, which is do the right thing. And so after, the deadline, the CRA deadline that I mentioned, the 60-day clock is technically up next week on April 24th. So we expected some movement, some action on this legislation potentially in the Senate in these 2 weeks. And so indeed, we heard yesterday that space was being created on the schedule, the Senate floor schedule, despite how busy it is with things like Iran war powers votes, the SAVE Act, several other things, DHS funding. Um, they carved out some time to consider House Joint Resolution 140. And so it was brought to the floor yesterday. I hope you all had the opportunity to watch the remarks, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a second, but there was about 3.5 hours of debate. And then this morning at around 11:30 this morning, the US Senate passed House Joint Resolution 140 by a 50 to 49 vote. So now it heads to the president's desk for signature. And so what did actually just happen? Um, you could probably tell I'm a little tired. It's been a really, really busy week, and it's been a really wild week to be here in Washington. And so, what just happened is that the US Senate voted to overturn the 20-year protections protecting the Boundary Waters watershed using an unprecedented legislative mechanism that opens a Pandora's box that threatens all of America's public lands. Public land orders, like this mineral withdrawal that protects the watershed, there have been many since 1996 when the Congressional Review Act was passed. They've been used to create military bases, to protect borderlands, to create national parks, to expand national parks, to create wildlife preserves, a whole host of things across many states. And so, when we were heading into this vote and when we were working offices, one of the points that we were making was this is going to come back to bite us all. This opens a very dangerous precedent, in addition to the fact that the Boundary Waters is beloved by people across the country. And even though the vote did not go the way we wanted it to go, again, it passed 50 to 49. I wanted to show you all this slide because this is a fraction of the partners and the people who are so invested in this fight and who have been helping us so profoundly. And what really happened today and over the past several weeks was that the community of hunters, anglers, veterans, paddlers, hikers, tribes, businesses, I mean, truly, 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 so many people and organizations fought really, really hard for this vote. And what I want to be able to share with you a little bit more specifically is that, what we see in the headlines is, Senate votes to overturn protections. But I want to share with you that it was really close. As of last night, we were receiving information that it was a 50-50 vote, and they were gearing up for Vice President Vance to have to come in and make the tie-breaking vote. There were many offices, and this was said by Senator Tina Smith in a presser we did earlier today. There were many Republican offices who privately did not want to take this vote and had significant doubts and concerns about the implications of what this might do for their states and for public lands more broadly. And so you might be asking yourself, then why did they vote the way that they did? And we are up against a multinational mining conglomerate owned by one of the wealthiest families in South America that has the ear of this administration in part because their lobbyist is the former Interior Secretary David Bernhardt. And so the fact that we've been able to beat back three legislative attempts last year and make this vote really, really hard for them is a tremendous victory. And so there is a silver lining here, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Because not everybody sees it, not everybody gets to experience it. But folks who thought that this vote would be easy were sweating until the last second. And we all made that happen. I was getting comments from offices who couldn't take any other calls on any other issue because the lines were so clogged with Boundary Waters advocates passionately, passionately fighting for Boundary Waters protections. Um, I was on the gallery, I was in the gallery watching the vote happen. Um, and there were discussions until the last minute. People tried really, really hard, and it was really, really close. And all of these people that you see on the screen, all of these organizations, this coalition is stronger than it has ever been because of these efforts, these joint efforts to protect this place and to push back against this unprecedented play. And so, a little bit of specifics on the actual vote count. The Democrats voted as a block, which is something we understood was going to happen, meaning all that the Democrats voted against the resolution. Excuse me. Um, Senators Tillis from North Carolina and Collins from Maine also voted against this resolution. There was one senator who did not vote, and that was Senator Hawley. During the remarks, the debate, we heard from Senator Tina Smith, Senator Amy Klobuchar, Senator Martin Heinrich from New Mexico, and Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin. And so those folks that I just listed, the speakers, Senator Tillis, Senator Collins, and everyone who voted against this resolution, they deserve profound thank yous. And I will have a slide at the end of this about how you can continue to help in this movement, but use our toolkit to thank these folks because they deserve thanks, and we really want to lift up that they did the right thing here. So what comes next? The previous legislative attempts, like I said, seemed to really suggest that there was going to be a pointed move to give Twin Metals mineral leases. And so, what we anticipate in the near future, although we don't have a specific timeline, is the issuance of federal mineral leases. So, once the resolution is signed by the president, the 20-year mining ban is lifted, and the federal lands and minerals can once again be leased to companies for development. We will see most likely the issuance of four federal mineral leases. Again, we see that because Twin Metals was always seeking four mineral leases for its project, and also previous legislation would have granted four as opposed to two mineral leases. Some things that we've been watching are other comment periods. So the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, is the regulatory sort of mechanism that makes sure that we do robust environmental analysis when we look at projects like this. That's the rule under which, the environmental impact statements happen or the environmental assessments. But NEPA, a bedrock environmental regulation and law, is being gutted. And so we used to have comment periods that were 30, 60, 90, 120 days for the American public to weigh in on how their lands, American public lands that belong to all of us equally, are governed. Chaco Canyon just had a mineral withdrawal reversed, and they were given a 7-day comment period that I believe took place over Easter. And so we're going to see this process probably move and fairly quickly. Again, because of language suggested in previous legislative attempts to overturn these protections, we're expecting that the lease terms will probably be quite generous. The original lease language had 10-year lease renewals, but in both legislative attempts, there was one that said 70-year lease renewals and another that said perpetual lease terms, basically meaning that there is no period that a company needs to renew a lease, which is for all intents and purposes a sellout of American public lands. After leases are acquired, we would assume that Twin Metals would submit a new mine plan of operations. They have submitted a mine plan in the past that was rejected by both the Bureau of Land Management and the Department of Natural Resources in Minnesota, and environmental review would begin. Um, Again, a lot of people have sort of been like, yeah, the protections are gone, but is there going to be a mine built tomorrow? And the answer is no, there's not going to be a mine built tomorrow. But what this does is pave the way for a project that is going to be fast tracked. They're going to move quickly on issuing these leases. They're going to move quickly on reviewing this mine plan, and all with the help of gutted environmental laws and regulations that truncate these processes. A lot of people have been asking about the role of the state, and that's a great question. The state of Minnesota provides a critical backstop for federal legislative action, or federal action at all, I should say. So all hard rock mining projects, we call it non-ferrous, not ferrous being iron ore, taconite mining. All non-ferrous mining projects have to go through Minnesota's environmental review process, and they have to get a state permit to mine, whether that's on private land, public land, state land. That state permit to mine is critical. And so we are also working in the state legislature to uphold our own environmental regulations in Minnesota because there have been attempts over many years to chip away at our environmental regulations, which a lot of people herald as extremely strong, but they are being undermined as we speak. There is also permanent protection legislation that is introduced in the House, in the state. And I'm remiss not to mention, of course, that Senator Smith also has a federal permanent protection bill that would permanently protect the federal lands and minerals in the headwaters of the boundary waters. There's a state version of that bill that prohibits this type of mining on state lands in the boundary waters watershed, but also bans the leasing and permitting of this type of mining in the headwaters of the boundary waters. So there's a legislative angle as well, in addition to that executive angle that I shared, where the agencies can speak up and deny a permit to mine. There's also litigation. So litigation is an option. A lot of folks have been asking about it, and nothing's off the table. I can't speak too much to that strategy, but just know that those conversations are happening. And you may have heard Senator Smith on the previous press event earlier today talking about, there's a lot of concerns about this particular process that was just used to undo these protections. If a public land order such as this has never been determined to be a rule that the Congressional Review Act can be applied to, that's an important question for all of us to try to answer. And so what you can do to help, there's still a lot that folks can do. Um, I don't want anyone to feel like anything is over. I don't want anyone to feel like they didn't matter in this. I think, and I know pardon me while I get on and off my soapbox here, but it's been really, really poignant to be in DC because, um, some people have been calling every single day, and other people say, I'm not calling because it doesn't matter. And I think what I want to also be clear about in terms of what happened today is the folks who voted to pass this resolution are the people who purport to represent the American people in Congress. And they're not doing that. They're not doing their job. So they're not speaking for their constituents. They are working at the behest of a multinational Chilean corporation and at the behest of the White House. And so, what's really important for everybody to do and remember is that we need to do follow up on this vote. So, the calls were really important to try to get them to do the right thing. And now we need to celebrate the people who did, and we need to hold the lawmakers that didn't accountable. There are so many lawmakers who call themselves public lands champions, who ride that title and wave and wear their cowboy boots and say that they love to go hiking and then take votes like this. And so we need your help to keep these lawmakers accountable. And we're going to have more information about accountability campaigns, but you'll probably see several other partner organizations organizing on how to keep these lawmakers accountable. If you're in Minnesota, please contact your state senators and representatives. Like we said, the state provides a very important backstop, and folks in the state need to know that Minnesotans are pissed. And we're hearing that already. Someone told me, St. Paul is just losing it right now. Not St. Paul, the entire city, but the capital, the place of government. And so you can be part of that. You should be part of that. And please let them know that you're extremely concerned and disappointed in how the Senate voted today. That would be exceptionally helpful. Also, if you live in Minnesota, Senator Tina Smith, Senator Amy Klobuchar, they deserve profound thank yous for their remarks and their efforts to keep this resolution from passing. Some of the sort of basic ones that I always say, and I'd be remiss if I didn't, become a volunteer. We could always use more help. We had volunteers doing our texting program. If you've ever received a text from us, that's a real person behind that text. And they're asking you to take action. And we've had so many great conversations via text. This is a little bit of a tangent, but that's a fun thing that you can do as a volunteer. You can help us do our texting advocacy, for example, among many other things. You can make a contribution. So the Boundary Waters Defense Fund is sort of this separate little chunk of money that we have that's specific to continuing to fight against the onslaught that's been happening against the Boundary Waters, especially in DC. So that pool and your contributions and your tremendous, tremendous generosity has really allowed us to come to Washington, to be here to witness this vote, to be in the offices, to do what we need to do to fight back as hard as we possibly can and then hold people accountable after the fact. And then, of course, sign up for updates. I mean, I assume many, if not all of you, are here because you get updates from us, and that's awesome. We're so happy that you're part of this movement, but help spread the movement, right? This is a national wilderness area. American Public Lands belongs to everybody, and so we encourage you to share it far and wide with friends and family. I think I've talked longer than I already anticipated, which is just what happens sometimes. But I am really eager to chat with folks and answer any questions. So with that, we will start the Q&A period, and please feel free to put some of your questions in the Q&A function, and Libby and Kelsey will be sharing those with me, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Great. We have many questions, so I'm going to start at the top with Emma's question. Is it possible to reverse this?
That is a good question. So, the Congressional Review Act is durable. This resolution, the passage of this resolution is a durable thing. And what I mean by that is you need a law to be passed to undo a law. And with the state of Congress as it is, that's not going to happen in the next few years. Um, One of the questions I've been getting is, could you just put the 20-year protections back in place in a future administration, for example? And in part, why I think the Congressional Review Act was such a appealing tool for folks who were trying to advance this project and open this area to copper mining is that specifically within the language of the Congressional Review Act, it says that no substantially similar rule can ever be put in place again by a future administration. And so unfortunately, we if this stands, uh, a 20-year mining ban could not be put in place in the future. And so our best bet is legislation, counter legislation, and potentially litigation. Thanks for the question.
Similarly, is it possible there could be a revote, and what does that mean going forward?
A revote. That's an exciting prospect. I highly doubt that there would be a revote, um, only if it benefited the speaker. Leader Thune, Senator Thune, really sort of curates the schedule and makes votes happen and this, that, the other thing. And so he was a real driving force into getting this on the floor. And he's in charge of making sure that they don't bring anything to the floor that they're not going to be able to pass. That's a major role of a Senate leader. When you're in the majority, you don't want to bring things to the floor that aren't going to pass and make your party look like you're unorganized. And so he counts the votes, he whips the votes. Um, and so I think because it was so close and they won out, I don't see any world in which there would be um, a move to do a recount, whether by leadership or if there was a play by the minority. I don't think it would go anywhere. Um, so it's sort of hard to sort of guess sort of what that would mean. You'd have to sort of see what the recount would, how that would land, but I highly doubt there would be a recount.
Great. We have another question from Kristen. Does Canada have a say in this?
Oh, Canada. Yeah, Canada. I thought that I was gonna. I always say, don't forget to mention Canada during your presentation because someone will always ask about Canada. We have a blog called "What About Canada," specifically for that question, which is a good one. I'm not saying it's not a good one. Canada does have a role to play. We have a 1909 treaty between the U.S. and Canada that basically boils down to we won't pollute yours if you don't pollute ours. And it's about transboundary pollution going from one of the nations to the other. And so the Canadian government has been concerned and has weighed in on previous processes to assess this mine. The first time that the mine plan was introduced, the Canadian government did express concern that this pollution, if this mine or when this mine polluted, that Canada would be affected and the treaty would be violated. And so the Canadian government does have opportunities to look into the potential for pollution, as well as to petition the US government as its own, sovereign nation. And so there is movement on the Canadian side of things.
Thanks. Another question in our info at email account. Uh, does Twin Metals have to reapply now for a federal permit and go through the normal environmental review process?
So now, for all intents and purposes, I'm defining as now as, when the president signs the thing and the 20-year ban is lifted. Once the 20-year ban is lifted, mineral leases will likely just be given to the company, and then they do have to apply for federal permits. And sort of like I was mentioning, they have to go through an environmental review process, both at the federal and the state level. But the federal environmental review process is a shell of its former self. It used to be very robust. Public comment periods were long. Reporting requirements were robust and studies were in depth. And so that's where I mentioned the 7-day comment period for Chaco Canyon. Um, so they will be going through an environmental review process, and what that process looks like is yet to be determined. But I question how thorough and valid that review will be, given the propensity of this administration toward ignoring the science. And so that is something. So the shorter answer to your question is yes, they will have to reapply for those permits and go through an environmental review process. But I do think it's important to note that it would be different than past environmental review processes simply because of the status of our environmental laws in this country.
Another question from BA is what more can us out of state people do?
Thanks, BA. Um, what more can you out of state people do? Accountability, I think, is going to be huge. I think helping to, if your senator didn't vote the right way on this, helping them understand why they should have voted differently. If they did vote the right way on this, thanking them, being really engaged with their office because, we hear it goes back and forth. We hear that this is a very local parochial issue sometimes. But then there are it's so significant from a national perspective. And so out of staters can continue to stay loud as we head into a potential, permitting environmental review process. There will be opportunities for you all to participate, and it will be critical that you do. And so we'll keep you in the loop on that, but everybody has a say in what happens next. And so we'll need you very much in those moments, as we do now in terms of holding people to account and thanking them as appropriate.
Another question from Bert. Has anyone considered a ballot initiative in Minnesota to put a ban on copper mining and let the voters decide?
Thank you, Bert. It's my understanding that you need a ballot to get a ballot initiative. It needs to be approved by the legislature, and right now the votes are not there for such a thing. Um, but that's not the first time that idea has come up, and so I think, especially with sort of the upset in the state, I think a lot of things will be on the table in terms of some new and different ideas for how to protect the watershed. So thanks for raising that.
We have so many questions. Thank you all so much. I'm just going through them here. Some are very similar. A question from RE. Klobuchar mentioned the method this resolution was used in the CRA is unprecedented and that it can impact even the Grand Canyon. Are we able to dissect this analysis to see what other areas in the US are vulnerable to similar measures as HJ Res 140?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've done a lot of that work as part of our process in talking to lawmakers and trying to sort of convince them um, and urge them and educate them on kind of what the implications of this vote might be. And so, sort of the first level of it is that the Congressional Review Act being used to challenge public land orders. So public land orders have been passed or have been put in place across the country, to create military bases, to expand national parks, to do all sorts of things. And so there are a lot of landscapes at threat, and we do have a list of those, the public land orders that have been put in place since the CRA passed in 1996. So that's sort of the most like direct precedent concern. But in a broader sense, if you take out the sort of specifics of this, Congress used a tool meant only to evaluate and challenge rules, which are made, there's a very specific process for the creation of rules and a very specific definition. And they used it to challenge an agency decision. And so there are, from a separation of powers sort of perspective, the executive branch via agencies have the authority, the delegated authority to do things like public land orders, which are governed by a separate law called the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976. And so, in theory, then, any agency action that has never been thought of or considered a rule could be challenged using the Congressional Review Act. And so we're going to keep a sharp eye on, how the Congressional Review Act continues to be used. I know that there's a resource management plan that is currently being challenged for Grand Staircase Escalante in Utah using the Congressional Review Act. The resolution's been introduced, but it hasn't passed the floor or the Senate. So you can check out, there's several groups that are doing great work on that. But use of the CRA in these unprecedented ways could really be quite expansive. But we can wrap our heads around other landscapes that have public land orders specifically that might be targeted by the Congressional Review Act.
And then just as a follow-up, Nicholas asks, so can this be tried in court then? Is this a legal use of the CRA?
That question is on the table and being considered, and we will be able to share more about that um, in the future. But I can't really speak to the legal strategy side of things at this time. But your head's in the right place.
I think we're going to go for another 5 minutes. We have a lot of great questions. Some are really, really specific, so I think we can have folks email or talk to us offline about them. Thank you so much for your interest and your dedication. Um, One question that I'm seeing here. What is, let me see here. Gosh, there's so many wonderful ones. What about Indigenous nations? How are they in need of volunteer support, locals living nearby?
I can't speak for the bands specific to that. I would encourage you to do direct outreach. But I'll take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the tribes. There were so many letters of support for protecting the boundary waters from tribal nations across the country in the CRA fight, excuse me, including from all the bands in Minnesota, the Chippewa tribes. The three bands that are kind of in the immediate vicinity, um, they hold the right to hunt, fish, and gather under an 1854 treaty. That's Grand Portage, Fond du Lac, and Bois Forte. And uh, there was a rumor going around that tribal leadership in Minnesota, and specifically in northeastern Minnesota, was in favor of the Twin Metals Project and in favor of House Joint Resolution 140, which was untrue, is untrue. And so folks are really fired up. Tribes are really fired up. And I think there's a profound sense of disrespect. A lot of tribes put in a lot of calls across the country. And there are treaty obligations in among many other reasons why the sovereign nation to sovereign nation conversations are so critical in considering votes like this. Um, and so I'd reach out to tribes directly and offer support if they need it. Um, but I think this is a really concrete way that the movement has also gotten stronger. Folks are really speaking out in a big way, and we're really, really grateful for our tribal partners in this fight.
Thank you. Pivoting to a question from Andy, can state legislation override this? Or is this stuck at the federal level because this is concerning federal public lands? If you could clarify.
Yeah, that's right. So state legislation could only deal in issues on state land. It can't dictate what the federal government does with the federal lands and minerals. So state legislation could not overturn this vote.
Okay, I think we're going to leave it there with the questions. Thank you so much. And we will definitely be following up with a recording and feel free to email info@savetheboundarywaters.org with additional questions as always.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. We so appreciate you uh, tuning in. So many of you, such great questions. Info@savetheboundarywaters.org. I'm also just Ingrid at savetheboundarywaters.org. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Um, this movement would be nothing without all of you. Um, I've never felt alone in this work a day in my life. And even on these really dark and challenging days, the messages, the phone calls to our offices, the texts, the emails, you're all amazing. And we couldn't do it without you. And so please reach out anytime. And we lost this battle, but we're going to win the war. And I look forward to doing it with all of you. So have a good night, and thank you again for joining.